Hello everyone. So this is going to be session number 3, and in this session I'm going to talk about hidden hunger and types of malnutrition. Very important. We have already discussed about type 1 and type 2 nutrient. I will touch base upon it because primarily our types of malnutrition depends upon what kind of nutrients are lacking in children. So I will again touch base on that, but let's start with the types of malnutrition. So basically, we all know there is hunger, okay? But there is a difference between actual hunger and hidden hunger, okay? Hunger means like you don't have food to eat. So when you say that, child is hungry, there is no food to eat to the child. In India, we don't see hidden hunger as much, okay? Because through PDS system, children are getting some food, of course. They're getting rice, depending upon which state they are. They get THR, take-home ration. They get midday meals. So they do get food. It's not that they go really hungry. Very few, I would say, literally very few percentage children have really no food. But generally in my experience in working in slums of Mumbai, I hardly saw any child going hungry. Okay, in that hunger, when a child is hungry, obviously child is not getting enough calories, but main thing is child is not getting a lot of nutrients also, so absence of calorie is just child is not getting food. That's what is called hunger. And it occurs mainly in a situation like famine and food insecurity, and generally in a world there are about 1 billion hungry children. Okay, so we do have a issue of poverty, of course, in war-stricken areas and food insecure areas, or during famine time or any emergencies. What is hidden hunger? So if you look at, if you ask any mother, in slums or even rural areas or tribal areas or even regular day-to-day middle class family, mostly their diet is roti, sabji, some sabji, dal and rice. Very monotonous food, so they have rice in the morning, so they have either poha or they'll have wheat, so upma or idli or any of those, so grain based diet in the morning. Afternoon it's mainly roti sabji or roti, and evening they have, like, depending upon states, generally khichdi or some maybe some vegetable. So very monotonous diet that we Indians eat, by and large. I'm talking about on a day-to-day basis. Okay, there might be some time that you may have more dishes, but by and large, routinely we eat a very monotonous diet, and that has changed in past few years. And when you eat such monotonous diet, okay, then you won't get many of these nutrients which are required for child to grow. Okay, so that is called hidden hunger. I mean, child's stomach is getting filled with this food, because he's eating all this food. But what is required to grow that child, that is not going in his stomach, okay, or that's not going in his body, and that's called hidden hunger. Okay, so we'll focus on hidden hunger and why it occurs. So obviously, now as you've already gone through type 1 and type 2 nutrient, from our tutorial and also my session. So here let's apply it in the field, like, apply it and let's figure out like what is hidden hunger, and then discuss a little bit more detail about some type 2 nutrient. One type 2 nutrient we already discussed is protein, but here I'm going to discuss many more, like other micronutrients which are probably lacking in a diet. Okay, so here if you look at type 1 micronutrient deficiency, okay, here the normal child who does not have type 2 nutrient deficiency in the diet, and if suppose this child say develop type 1 deficiency, so for example say iron, okay, so look at the growth of this child. The growth is absolutely normal, but here in this child, because even here the growth is normal, type 1 initially growth is normal. Okay, so the growth does not get affected, same height, right? Even the arm circumference looks the same, so muscle mass is still the same. But what happens, you see the symptoms of type 1 deficiency. So here because child is iron deficient, you seeing a child is probably pale. Okay. Now look at the type 2 deficiency. Now type 2 deficiency, when child has enough type 2 type 2 nutrient rich food, their height and weight looks good. Okay. But when you have child who is deficient in type 2 nutrients, say for a long period of time, you see stunting. So here you can see the growth has stunted. Okay. When the type 2 nutrients are deficient for say shorter period of time, say child has diarrhea, child did not eat anything, or say over a period of 2, 3 or maybe 4, 6 weeks, child did not get protein in the diet or some important nutrient type like which is required for growth, you will see that child initially will have wasting, which that means the muscle mass has kind of melted, and then eventually the height will suffer. Okay, so that's the difference between your type 1 and type 2 deficiency, and what you will see mainly the growth. So most important is the growth. So growth failure is your type 2 nutrient deficiency. Specific signs and symptoms of some metabolic disease, metabolic condition, like for example, I would say biochemical reaction. So that's your type 1. So in iron deficiency, you will see anemia. Okay, in calcium and vitamin D deficiency, you will see rickets. So very specific. You'll know where exactly which organs are involved. If it's vitamin A deficiency, you will notice the child has night blindness, or child has xerosis, the dryness of conjunctiva, or child has immune problem. They have more. They don't have good resistance to infection. So those are basically, those are very specific kind of signs and symptoms that you see with type 1. Growth is not affected initially. Growth may affect it maybe late in the stage. Okay. So if the growth is affected, it's basically a type 2 nutrient. Alright. So here I've mentioned already about what are type 1 functional nutrients, and type 2, those are growth nutrients. Okay, mainly type 1 nutrients, I again mentioned iron, iodine, copper, calcium, selenium, all your vitamins, right? Your fat soluble vitamins, your B complex, your water soluble vitamins. Then your type 2 nutrients are basically, your essential amino acids, your essential fatty acids, your minerals, potassium, magnesium, phosphorus, sulfur, zinc, sodium, chloride. Those are your type 2 nutrients. Okay, and this already I have discussed, so I may not go too much in detail. Remember that type 2 is growth failure. Type 1 is initially there is no growth failure. Okay, in type 2, when it gets very severe, child's appetite gets affected. Okay, so those children are basically they are called complicated acute severely acute malnourished child, because when malnutrition becomes very severe, when the wasting becomes very severe, they do lose appetite. Okay, in type 1, by and large, there is not we don't see much loss of appetite in these children. Okay. Again, this is same thing again. I don't want to go too much in detail because we have already discussed about it. Signs and symptoms of type 2 deficiency. What are the 3 things that we check for growth? We check weight, we check length or height, or we check MUAC, mid upper arm circumference. So if any of these are affected, that means it's type 2 nutrient. So please, in your program, do focus on type 2 nutrient food, rich food, mainly complementary food, and your pregnant mother's diet, lactating mother's diet. Tell mother to start giving type 2 nutrient dense food in children's diet. They will grow beautifully. Okay, and in my protein, I've already mentioned which are protein rich food is basically your eggs. If child is non-veg, start with meat, start with fish, start with bone broth. You can start those as first foods. A lot of countries in Europe are recommending those non-veg diet to begin with. Egg is the best food to start actually, but if children are vegetarian, then you can start basically dal, more than dals. I would recommend beans. So sprout it, dry it, make powders. I'm going to show a recipe of those powder those beans also. You can also start with dahi. You can give paneer. Don't give milk, because mother's milk is good enough. So you don't give milk, otherwise the mothers will stop giving their own milk, right? But then also think of adding some seed powder, some nut powder, peanut powder, and those are protein rich recipes. But also think of other nutrient, which today I'm going to discuss, is magnesium, potassium, zinc, sulfur. Those are all type 2 nutrients, and those are basically hidden hunger. So if child is getting food, but if child does not have food which is rich in magnesium or potassium or zinc, those children will have type 2 deficiency. Okay, they will not grow well. Okay, so, and some of them are kind of rate limiting nutrient, means even if you give a lot of protein, but if that protein source doesn't have, say, enough zinc or enough magnesium or any of those, children will not grow. Okay, so that's called your hidden hunger. Okay, now these are types of malnutrition. So basically, when you say child is malnourished, or even if you say adult is malnourished means obesity, means big, over, or under. Okay, in India now we are seeing both. We are seeing undernutrition also. We are seeing all these adults are big, huge. If you look at the tummy, if you do your waist circumference is much bigger. Okay, in some states it's like 80 to 90% women have waist to hip ratio much higher. Okay, higher than normal. All right, so that means we are struggling with both. Our children are not growing. Okay, they are undernourished, they are stunted, they are underweight, and our older people are becoming big. So that means something is wrong in food, right? I mean, if you're getting the right kind of nutrition, why would you become big, or why would child become undernourished, right? So think about it. Second thing is, our children are becoming big too. So in urban areas and some of the rural areas, some of the children are very thin, some of the children are very fat, big. Okay, so think about it, why that is happening. Okay, now obesity, again I will discuss it later in other sessions, but I will not discuss obesity right now. Today I'm going to talk exclusively about undernutrition. Okay, so type 2 nutrient, as I mentioned, they are underweight, they are stunting, and they are acute wasting. Acute wasting means suddenly become thin. Okay, so the height is not suffered, but suddenly they have become thin because of diarrhea or some type 2 nutrient deficiency over a short period of time. Chronic stunting means height. So if you look at height for age or length for age, that is also type of malnutrition, type of undernutrition. Okay, short children, that means they are stunted, they are undernourished for a long period of time. It's called chronic. Chronic means for a long period of time. Okay, acute means suddenly. Okay, that's a term, medical term, acute. And third is underweight. So if you weigh the child and say the average weight of a child for that age is, say, 10 kg, the child is only 7 kg, your child is only, say, 6 kg, that means the child is underweight for that age, right? And that basically, that's also type of undernutrition, and that's your type 2 nutrients, because this is all growth, right? Your weight, your height, your wasting, your mid upper arm circumference, those are all growth. Okay, so when you have type 2 nutrients, you will see growth failure. And to look at growth failure, whether it is in the short duration time or a long duration time, you look at whether it is acute malnutrition or whether it is the chronic malnutrition. Okay, and then you have type 1 nutrient deficiency. So remember type 1, which nutrients I mentioned? I mentioned about iron, I mentioned about calcium, I mentioned about iodine, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin B. Those are all basically type 1 nutrient deficiency. And in that, as I said, you will not see much of a nutrient deficiency, I mean the growth failure, but what you will see is, you will see symptoms. Okay, now let's come back to your type 2 nutrient deficiency. So in type 2 nutrient deficiency, suppose you have an underweight child, then I'm going to come back again and explain to you those growth charts, but just for this particular session, remember that any of this growth failure, either they are severe, means very severe, means really bad, or moderate, means moderate. Okay, so each growth failure are divided into moderate, for example, underweight, moderate underweight, severe underweight. Stunting, moderate stunting, severe stunting. Okay, and wasting, moderate malnutrition, acute malnutrition, severe acute malnutrition. So when we talk about SAM-MAM, that's your undernutrition or wasting in a short duration. Okay, and that's your acute malnutrition. Okay, now how they are defined, Basically what they do, they look at your growth chart, they use the Z-score WHO growth chart, so standard deviation. Okay, so that I will explain in my last session. I will explain those growth charts. So then I'll come back again to that which children are SAM, which children are MAM, how will you know that they're SAM, MAM. Okay, so we'll go in detail in that. I don't want to go too much in detail in this lecture. And SAM is divided into basically, non-edematous, but sometimes, the severely malnourished children have a lot of swelling in the body. So when you press their, feet, when you press their, legs or hands, they have a lot of edema. Okay, they have pitting edema. So those children are basically, we call it edema, edematous acute malnutrition. When you have some children, they don't have edema, they look very thin. Okay, there is no edema. So those are non-edematous acute malnutrition. Okay, and sometimes you find children who have, say, both edematous as well as non-edematous malnutrition. Okay, they have mixed malnutrition. So those are basically mixed SAM. Okay, all right. So again, here I just talked about this acute malnutrition, moderate acute malnutrition, and SAM, severe acute malnutrition. Severe acute malnutrition, depending upon child has edema or does not have edema, it is divided into 3 types: non-edematous SAM, edematous, edema means swelling, and mixed SAM. Okay, all right. Here what we have done, we have just shown, and I'll go again detail in my last session. So SAM basically you take growth chart, which is WHO, and you look at the Z-score, not the percentile growth chart. Although I love percentile growth chart for individual monitoring, but to look at if the child is underweight or stunted, or for SAM, we look at Z-score. So in that Z-score, basically your weight for height is less than -3 standard deviation. Okay. For SAM, MUAC, mid upper arm circumference, is less than 11.5 centimeter. Okay, for 6 to 59 months of age. And for if child has any present of bilateral pitting edema, there is no other cause of that pitting edema. Basically it is because of severe acute malnutrition. Okay, these children may not be having their weight might be okay because there's a lot of fluid collection. Okay, and in MAM what you have is basically, when you look at the standard deviation growth chart, these children fall between -2 standard deviation and between -2 and -3 standard deviation. Okay, and MUAC is between more than 11.5 to less than 12.5 centimeter. Okay, so here I'm going to discuss about type 2. So again, in last presentation, in last session, I showed you, what happens when you have type 2 nutrient deficiency. Obviously, because type 2 is not stored in the body, it's part of your tissue, muscle tissue, your organ, those are made up of your type 2 nutrients. So when you don't have type 2 in your food, then because it is part of so many metabolic functions, so many enzymes, so it has to come from somewhere. Otherwise, child would die right away. So here, your type 2 nutrients are coming from muscle mass. Okay, so that's why muscles are melting. Okay, so obviously this child would be underweight. They would have MUAC, which is much smaller than 11.5. And also, if it continues for a long time, if say child survives, then child would have growth failure. In a sense, child will have less height or less length. Okay, so that's the important aspect. When it goes on for a long period of time, as I mentioned, they will become short. Okay, so these are about same age children, and look at the height difference. Similarly, this is a picture from Guatemala, and 9 years old supposed to be here, but they all are short. Means obviously they haven't got type 2 nutrient for a long time. Okay, so again, what is acute malnutrition? Short-term nutrition problem, primarily type 2 micronutrient deficiency. Okay, it could be because of lack of food, sudden lack of food in rainy season, or in any famine, or any of those. Sudden weight loss signs are you're thin, severely wasted or edematous. We don't call it marasmus or kwashiorkor. I've just kept the name so that people who have learned this marasmus or kwashiorkor, they would be able to relate to it. But what we were taught is that marasmus is mainly edematous SAM, and it was marasmus. What we were told was a calorie deficiency. So children were thin. but we don't call that anymore. We don't call marasmus as or kwashiorkor. In kwashiorkor, what we were told was a protein deficiency. Now, child has lower weight than expected for that height. So, in acute malnutrition, the weight kind of decreases remarkably. Okay, so as per height, child needs to have certain amount of weight, but because the child has lost that weight, child is wasted. Okay, so that's called wasting. Chronic malnutrition is long duration of malnutrition. Failure to receive adequate nutrition for a long period of time. Okay, they may have diarrhea on and off, they get better, but they don't get put on that weight, whatever they have lost, and slowly their height suffer. Okay, they have growth failure, and they are called stunting. Now here is example. So if you look at this child is say normal, about 11-month-old babies. Okay, this child, you can look at it, he looks thinner. So if you look at their muscle mass, see how thin it is. You can see his rib cage also. So this child is wasting, acute malnutrition. Okay, height is a little bit low, but it's not that bad. Okay, now look at this child. This child, you can see the muscle mass is good, it looks okay, but the height is suffered. So this child is called chronic malnutrition. Okay, and this child is basically acute malnutrition. Now, this is acute malnutrition, this is chronic malnutrition. Okay, similarly, same thing, same child, this is the normal child, this is your wasted child. Means, look at the mid-arm circumference, much smaller, right? Your muscle is gone. Okay, and this child has lost height, because this child probably was like this on and off, not so bad, but eventually his height is suffered. Now, if this child, chronically stunted child, develops some, say, diarrhea or pneumonia, or stop eating, and if this child gets acutely malnourished like this, where he loses a lot of muscle mass, that child is at very high risk of developing any severe condition in which we can lose this child. So mortality is very high in a child who has stunting as well as wasting. Okay, so this is of course the example of type 2 deficient rats. So rats which are type 2 nutrient deficient are much smaller than the rats which are normal. Okay, so you see similar kind of results even in plants. So in plants where you kind of put a lot of these nutrients, phosphorus and all those minerals, then you will see much better growth in those plants. While plants which does not have good amount of fertilizers, they won't grow as big or tall. With this, I'm going to end part 1 of the session. We discussed about types of malnutrition and hidden hunger. Most of us have one or the other deficiency of vitamins, minerals, or any of those nutrients I discussed. So that's why we have created tutorials on recipes, so that if you have any of those symptoms, do think of one of those nutrient deficiency, and then you can learn to cook and add those natural food, which can give you all those nutrients which are required for you to maintain your health, and also to maintain your immunity, resistant power, to prevent you from chronic conditions. So I do I do request you all to watch those tutorials. Thank you.